school here at the University of Maryland. And I'm going to go ahead and post this announcement in the chat and Discord. I will go ahead and start sharing my screen. And visible? Thumbs up? Excellent. All right. So yeah, so I'm going to be talking to you about a fairly new project, some early work we're doing on facilitating cross-disciplinary conversations with analogical search. I'm really excited to share this early work and some proofs of concept and some design work we're doing. So let's start with a story. We have an engineer, his name is Jose Odon, who's interested in the problem of how to safely assist with difficult childbirth. We have existing solutions like forceps and vacuums and so on, but he's really interested in really affordable, safe options that will be more widely accessible. One day, he happens across a YouTube video on a party trick for extracting a cork from a wine bottle without damaging either the bottle or the cork. And he thinks to himself, I wonder if this could be repurposed to give me some new ideas for this childbirth problem. Fast forward a little bit, in 2013, he comes up with the invention of the Odon device, which uses a similar principle from the party trick to actually produce a low-cost, easy-to-use technological innovation that can minimize trauma to the mother and baby, potentially revolutionary development in obstetrics. Got the WHO very, very excited. Many, many other examples of this, of how analogies can be a rich source of breakthrough innovation. We have simulated annealing, a very famous statistical optimization technique that was invented by analogy to metallurgy. Thomas Edison invented the precursor to the motion picture device by analogy to a phonograph. Computer programming was inspired actually by weaving techniques, and so on and so forth. Many, many examples of analogies crossing domains and inspiring breakthrough innovation. And the key idea behind analogies is relationships similarly based on relations instead of, or in spite of, similarity of surface features like color or application domain. You can cross fields, domains, and areas to find ideas in many different places. So in the Odon device example, we have similarity, even though one's about wine and wine bottles, and the other is about babies and childbirth. We can actually see an underlying structure that's the same about extracting or delivering something from a wine bottle or birth canal while preventing damage or injury to both items. And that similarity allows the inventor to see, oh, maybe there's something I could transfer from over here into here. The problem we're trying to solve is that although this is a very powerful strategy for innovation, frequently it happens by chance. It's very hard to plan this or intend this. You often have to get lucky enough to have a seemingly unrelated experience that happens to unexpectedly matter for a problem. Some people call this outsider innovation, where someone with a lot of experience from outside a domain is able to leverage the experience to come up with a competitive, innovative advantage. One example of this is Wright brothers, who previously worked in bicycles and then were the first to invent the airplane. Other chance routes include happening to meet somebody who happens to connect you to a breakthrough idea and so on. We're interested in how we can make this process less dependent on luck and a little bit more under our control, recognizing, of course, we can't create an algorithm for it. Some of our past work in this space has been developing analogical search techniques that use natural language processing to break down documents like products and papers into ideas about their purpose, what they are for, and mechanisms, how they work, and then do matching based on those components instead of elements like this is about cell phones, or this is about wine bottles, or this is about childbirth, really attending to the underlying relational structure of the purposes and mechanisms. And we find that once we do this, we're able to come up with really interesting analogical matches that can cross domains, such as connecting cell phone charger cases to human pulley-powered generator suits, completely ignoring the cell phones, as opposed to only matching very, very similar things from the same domain. And we've been able to extend this to research papers as well to be able to connect papers based on shared problems instead of just the domains. So here, if you have a paper on crowdsourced ideation in innovation, we can make a connection not just to other papers that are about crowdsourced ideation, but also other techniques about crowdsourcing that have nothing to do with ideation, for example. They're both about identifying or ranking things as opposed to just generating ideas. So this technique has shown some promise. The problem we're facing right now is we're trying to translate this into real impact on innovators and researchers is what we call the knowledge gap. So something we've noticed is in a lot of studies and systems in the past, the new domain that you're trying to make a connection to is often already known to the innovator, such as in the outside innovation case, or in studies of analogical problem solving, the experimenters actually make that domain very understandable to the innovator. And still, people don't always make use of the connection. In contrast, in many settings that we care about, analogous domains are not necessarily understandable to the seeker. So if you knew nothing about metallurgy and you're working on statistics, if I showed you a paper about how annealing works in metallurgy, it may not mean anything to you. You may not be able to recognize the significance of the match or be able to use it as a starting point for anything interesting, even if the matches are good. Compounding this problem, often analogical inspiration paths can be long and oblique. Often the initial entry point is actually not useful, but it opens up ideas that are then useful down the line. And so if you short circuit the process in the beginning and aren't able to think of anything else that's related, you end up with nothing. On the flip side, there's an opportunity to think about how cross-disciplinary innovation happens right now. A lot of it happens through people. A lot of work on interdisciplinary innovation shows the best first resource for exploring new domains is a person. They're able to hone in on aspects of the problem that are interesting to you and help you to sort the wheat from the chaff. On the flip side of that is that there are often very high search costs for finding the right person to talk to across domains. Sometimes even within your own organization, we have experiments showing that simple interventions to bring people together ends up making connections that were obvious in retrospect, but were left dormant for many, many years because it's hard to know what people know and hard to find connections based on that. There's also a potential social gap in some experiments when they make these introductions across disciplines. Nothing happens from there either because people don't always know what to talk about. So there's a bit of a social gap here as well. So the concept behind this work is to kind of try to put these two things together. Analogical search, which overcomes search costs but has a knowledge gap, and matchmaking, which overcomes the knowledge gap but has search costs and social gaps. How do we put these two things together to make the best of both worlds? The concept we're naming is, we're going to name it analogical matchmaking. And the intuition is instead of just giving analogical search results, like a search engine, we design our system to integrate into a larger system that gives seekers resources to explore analogous domains. So let's quickly walk through an actual example of how this might work. So for comparison purposes, we'll introduce a scenario in the previous world where we just have analogical search. So suppose you have a problem of, I want to reduce motion or seasickness in virtual reality. You run it through our analogical search engine based on purposes and mechanisms, and you get results like this: a pipelined resampling processor. It is connected based on the shared problem of motion compensation, but this is very hard to make sense of. Similarly, another result that actually came back is nonlinear canonical correlation analysis, compressed representation approach. Again, the algorithm suggests that there is a connection based on the shared purpose of compact representations of data, but again, this is quite inscrutable. And we actually showed this to some of our earlier participants, and they couldn't make any sense of it. So in contrast, what we're going to do is we're going to make three main modifications to this architecture. The first thing is we're going to change the outputs to inputs, right? So instead of ending with the analogical matches, we now feed that into a second module that is about generating prompts. How do we generate prompts to talk to people about for exploring this new domain? So we extract using our techniques, the mechanisms like nonlinear canonical correlation, resampling techniques, and also the domain, image transfer and data compression. And then we come up with analogical prompts like this. In what ways is data compression or heavy image transfer similar or different from your problem? How might solutions or techniques from there inspire new approaches to your problem with these example entry points? So notice the matches, which are previously just, we just gave you the abstracts. Now they're couched inside this less intimidating and more accessible prompts. They are less about this is immediately useful to what does this spark for you? Second important thing that we're doing, well, the third actually, is to add a guide finder module where we need to also look for people for you to talk this over with. And this is not super complicated. We can use the analogical matches information from there to extract, say, who's working on these domains that you already know that can help you explore. So we can run searches for the analogical matches in databases and filter by affiliation, for example, and then find you some people who are, say, talk to this person about canonical correlation analysis because they co-authored a recent paper on that, and they're working on information bottlenecks and so on. So the end result for the user is instead of a list of papers that are hard to understand, we actually give you some prompts to talk to somebody else with to start your exploration. So just to make that comparison more explicit, in some, if you have a starting problem like this, instead of having a list of papers like this, you end up with a list of prompts and people to talk to about those things. So that's the concept. And just to highlight the hypothesized mechanisms, the intuition behind why this is supposed to work, again, is that the guides are meant to help bridge the knowledge gap. They help you to explore the domain. And the prompts help you to bridge the social gap of not knowing what to talk to those people about. And we're reframing the analogical results as not results, but as inputs to help generate guides and prompts. They're not ends in themselves. That's the general concept. And we've done some early validation work of this neat finding. We're interested in exploring sanity checks of the guide recommendations, how useful the raw results are versus the prompts, and also identifying any interesting open or hidden problems in the overall concept. So very quickly, we looked at, talked to 3 researchers. They gave us some of their problems. We ran it through the pipeline. It was a hybrid human-machine pipeline. And we gave them results, prompts, and guides instead of just results. Here's a quick sense of the kinds of problems they were working on. So career development opportunities in tech for underrepresented populations, skills training for ethical software engineering, motion sickness in virtual reality. And we make connections like this. Game-based and informal learning, maybe that inspires new approaches to instruct software security concepts. Go talk to a colleague that's designing games for math instruction. Complex distributed systems, reasoning about this complex behavior, maybe that helps inspire some new ideas about how to help people reason about complex social, technical, ethical consequences of design choices. Go talk to your colleague with background in electrical engineering and systems research. And we actually already showed you this example. This was a real example that we worked with. So what do we find? So some of our learnings, we do have a sanity check that we feel is passed for matches. This theme came up across the 3 participants when they saw the results. They're like, oh, these seem weird, but actually now that you name it, they seem obvious. Same thing happened when they went to talk to some of them. So a guide said, but of course you should talk to me about this. Even though they knew each other, they had talked about things before for many years, but they never had a conversation about this exact thing. So these connections are often obvious in retrospect, which we count as a win. The other thing we see is that the analogical results themselves, validating our intuitions, are very hard to understand in isolation and use by themselves. So some comments include, I'm not sure I get all the pointers, the results, but I know someone who will. Or naming the domains are actually a lot more useful to me than the actual papers, but that might be because I'm not an expert in those fields. And then here's a comment from one of the guides. They see the general connection to their work, but they don't know why this particular technique was chosen. Lots of details here that weren't obvious to the seeker, but there's enough here that they set a longer meeting for the following week to follow up on this. So that's, I think, a win for us as well. Finally, we have comments about the prompts helping with the social gap. Like, I felt empowered. I'm not afraid to talk to these people, especially because you've given me concrete ways to phrase the questions. So just to close with a couple of discussion points on the hidden or open problems. So far, because we're still in the early stages of design, we're doing a Wizard of Oz approach. So we've got some technical components that we have in place already, but we're also mixing in some human work. Probably the hardest part is prompt formulation, but it's, I think, solvable with simple template-based natural language generation or language models potentially. But also, maybe you don't want to automate everything. You could imagine taking this architecture and running a workshop based on this, for example, and not really need a lot of fancy tech for this. The value is in the process and the understanding of the concept of thinking about prompts and guides instead of just matches. Finally, a short point here about how to measure the goodness of initial matches. Reframing has consequences for measuring accuracy. So rather than just measuring relevance, we also want to know how many new ideas might be sparked by this, and that might be challenging to optimize for as well. So that's something that we need to think about for future work. All right, so I'm going to close there. I actually haven't been keeping time for myself, so I do apologize. Here's a summary of the main points. I think I probably have a couple minutes for some questions. I'm going to open the chat now. Thank you to my core team, collaborators, and funders for this as well. All right, so I'm opening the chat now, and not seeing any questions yet. Just feel free to type your questions in the chat, or are you able to raise your hand? I'm not sure. Normally, the session chair will ask kickoff questions, but since I'm also the presenter, that's very awkward. So I'm not going to ask questions of myself. All right, we got a question from Ray Falk. Have you applied conceptual blending or related concepts? That's a good question. It is related. So conceptual blending is very kind of related idea of taking two things that seem very different and putting them together. That might be a fun scaffold to add to the prompts, right? Instead of just saying, is this thing relevant for you? We could have scaffolded exercises of how might you combine elements of this with elements of that, for example, as a more inviting way to explore the new domains. So that might be interesting as well. Another question from Petra, would it be helpful to see the problem of finding similar ideas in other fields as cross-language retrieval problem? Yeah, potentially. So in terms of the technical limitations right now, we're from a technical standpoint, we're embedding the purposes and mechanisms that are extracted, the spans of text. And so it's still relatively close to the way that the meaning of those words and the actual words that are used. But you could imagine wanting to bridge further gaps, needing to have a bit more abstraction. And so having a way to translate between domains, I think would be useful. So you could imagine modeling this as a sequence problem that might be interesting as well. Yeah. All right. Any more questions? Thank you for engaging. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And give John a chance to get set up here. So next up we have John Morabito, who is a recent-ish graduate of our HCIM program, presenting some work from his master's thesis, which he completed with us. It's going to talk about context and scholarly knowledge synthesis. I place a link to the Medium post in the chat as well.
Can you hear me? Audio's
Yep.
working? Awesome. Are you ready whenever?
Yep, go ahead.
Awesome. All right, thank you, Joel. So yeah, as Joel mentioned, my name is John Morabito. This talk is about managing context during scholarly knowledge synthesis. So this quote has been used a lot in our lab's presentations. It's related to knowledge work. This quote related to knowledge work has been used in a lot of our presentations because it symbolizes a very common experience that many researchers have with literature reviewing. The search for information in a literature review is almost never confined to a single source. By definition, you're reviewing literature to explore and create new insights to find the boundaries of human knowledge. This synthesis process can leave behind a mess of intractable information across physical and digital documents and note-taking applications. Ironically, in this very study on the challenges of context capture and reuse, I struggled to conduct my own literature review. So, literature reviewing is the process of surveying scholarly sources to gain an understanding of a particular domain or field of knowledge. This allows researchers to find gaps in existing knowledge which can prompt new ideas, insights, and areas for further research. As was mentioned in the quote on the last slide, the challenge of conducting a literature review can increase considerably when the research is building on a large body of previous research, which is often the case. An important aspect of literature reviewing is reusing information after it has been captured. An example of this could be when you're scanning through highlights you've previously made on a research paper. Reusing notes and highlights that have been previously captured can happen at any stage in the literature reviewing process, and this makes it challenging to know what and how much context you might need to capture. We have evidence from literature in the field of computer-supported cooperative work, CSCW for short, that context plays an important role in information reuse. For example, in a field study of collaborative information reuse in aircraft technical support, engineers lamented reusing old records because information was missing, outdated, or not appropriate anymore because of procedural changes. Over the years, if any changes to those records were not tagged appropriately, then the context of those changes were lost. This image shows an example from that study of how many groups these records were passed between. So you can imagine how frustrating it would be for information to go missing. The importance of the role of context has also been observed in several other domains, such as telephone hotline groups, digital calendar systems, and digital calendar systems. However, comparatively little is known about whether and how challenges related to context manifest in knowledge synthesis work, and how these challenges might interact with the tools that are used to support knowledge synthesis. While conducting my own literature review for this study, I experienced many of the same challenges related to context that I was reading about. I experimented with a combination of tools, including Google Docs, Notion, Lucidchart, which is shown on the left image, and Miro board. I was trying to optimize my literature reviewing process, but each tool had its trade-offs, and combining them made keeping track of observations and citations even more challenging. The last tool I used in my literature review, Rome Research, was invaluable for helping me synthesize ideas and results for the study. However, it wasn't without its drawbacks. The image on the right is from my Rome database. The red circled areas show where reference information was deleted or moved only to be replaced with an unusable ID code. Across all of these tools, I had to reuse information that I had previously captured, but I would lose track of where the notes came from, who authored them, or what they even meant because they were taken out of context. And this is what made interpreting them a challenge. We believe that literature reviewing could be better if we could build tools to help manage all of this context, but we lack detailed understanding of what capturing context looks like in literature reviewing. To understand how to design literature reviewing systems that better support context capture and management, we studied how researchers capture contextual information in their notes and annotations and how this varies across generic and specialized tools for synthesis. For this study, we have some operational definitions which will be useful to know. When we talk about context, we're referring to any information that could assist with the interpretation, appraisal, and reuse of a scientific concept or claim, such as metadata or methods information. What we observed in the study were information capture events, which we define as actions that created an externally observable trace or record that persisted in some media. So an example might be a highlight or a margin note. Information reuse, which we did not look at in the study, but will be the subject of future studies, is simply reusing information that was previously captured. We had 4 participants in our study, 2 of whom were using tools with special affordances for literature reviewing. These were NVivo and Liquid Text. And the other 2 participants were using non-specialized generic tools, which were Google Docs, Microsoft OneNote, and physical pen and paper. The participants wore hat-mounted GoPros to record 45-minute sessions where they worked on their own research problems in their own settings during the information capture stage of the literature reviewing process. We conducted the study this way to better understand the nuances and details of current realistic practice. During these sessions, the participants verbalized their thoughts and actions. This image shows what the footage from the GoPro looks like, and on the left is a window from the qualitative data coding software DataView, which is where we broke down each session and took note of all the information capture events. From all of these sessions, we observed 3 recurring patterns of context capture across our 4 participants. The first pattern we observed was integrated context capture, where the participant captured context in addition to a piece of information that they deemed conceptually important. This image shows a highlight made in NVivo being dragged into a tag folder. NVivo automatically captures the page number and link to the source PDF and attaches it to the disembedded highlights, such as this one. The second pattern was standalone context capture. The participant would capture contextual information separately from the capture of a claim or observation from a paper. In this image, we see a participant captured the article title and author of the paper that they were reading, separate from any specific capture of a quote, concept, or claim from the paper itself. They were using Microsoft OneNote in this case. The third pattern we observed was when a captured idea, concept, finding, or theory also acted as context, either by explicit connection or implicitly due to spatial proximity. In the image, you can see a line is drawn connecting the highlighted concept to another concept written in the margin. From observing the variation in information capturing behavior between our 2 groups and across the 3 context capture patterns, we discovered 2 primary differences which we think have high potential for supporting more effective literature reviewing. Our first observation is that tools used by the specialized group support more effortless recontextualization, which makes it easy to view or return to the original context of a particular piece of information. One way to do this is a method called transclusion, where information is disembedded from one place, embedded in another, and able to be referenced back to its source from the new location, all in an automatic fashion. And this is opposed to manually looking up metadata, for example. In the screenshot of liquid text here, we can see an example of transclusion. The highlighted text has been disembedded from the PDF onto the right side of the screen into the text bubble, and the blue arrow at the top of the left of the bubble, when clicked, shows the location of where the text was taken in the original PDF. And this can be done across multiple documents. That blue line is showing the connection of where the text was taken from. The second observation is that participants separated and interacted with units of information which had higher levels of contextualizability in the specialized group. The participant who manually transferred their notes from a physical document also needed to manually transfer any metadata they might need in the future. And this can be seen in the left two images. A highlight is made on the physical paper and then copied over into Microsoft OneNote, with the page number of the highlight also manually being added. Both liquid text and in vivo attached metadata such as page number and PDF file name to highlights extracted from PDFs. Additionally, in vivo, one feature enables a progressive revelation of context surrounding a disembedded note or highlight. This is shown in the right image, where you can see the black text has been disembedded from a PDF, and the user is able to view more of the context from its original source, which is what the gray text is. Combined with transclusive properties like hyperlinks back to the source, all of these features can make recontextualizing information much easier. So as we saw, literature viewing is hard, and this is partly due to some of the challenges around context. People capture context for literature viewing in a variety of ways, and the tools that they use have affordances that substantially affect what that context capture looks like. These affordances have the potential to make literature viewing much easier. So for your own literature reviews going forward, I have a couple tool recommendations that you might consider trying. The first tool is called Citavi. It's a reference management and knowledge organizational tool, which allows you to trace annotations back to their original source with hyperlinks, like we saw in vivo and liquid text. Athens Research and Rome Research are new note-taking tools which provide outlining as a core feature, and this enables easy transclusion and remixing of notes. Obsidian is another note-taking tool that offers similar functionality. Liquid text and in vivo, as we saw, have features which make it easy to recontextualize notes taken from PDFs, which is generally the file format that academic papers are in. And generally speaking, you want to look for tools which will help you capture context while you're taking notes. Then on the other end of the spectrum, you want the tool to make it easy to recontextualize your notes and to give you the ability to go back to the source if needed. And for anyone who's designing software to support research and the knowledge synthesis process, you'll want to consider building on some of the same features and concepts mentioned earlier. Features like transclusion and progressive context reveal can make it much easier to navigate and synthesize information while still retaining context. And for augmenting information capture, think about how and what kinds of contextual information can be captured when users are bringing information into your tool to minimize the amount of potential backtracking in the information reuse stage. At the end of our study, in an exploratory analysis, we observed that the participants using the specialized tools captured more contextual information than the participants using non-specialized tools. This prompts several questions which can be the focus of future work. Do the qualitative differences in context capture mechanics lead to more context being captured? Do variations in context capture patterns correlate with the ease or quality of downstream synthesis? The context capture mechanics of specialized tools appear to make synthesis easier by reducing the amount of backtracking needed to find mismanaged or uncaptured information, but it remains to be seen whether or not this extra capturing of and support for context leads to gains in downstream knowledge synthesis. Thank you.
Thanks, John. All right. So we got plenty of time for questions. We have at least 5 minutes for our conversation here. So feel free to drop your questions in the chat here, or I guess on Discord as well. So I'll kick us off. John,
Mhm.
in your study, what was the most interesting and surprising thing that you saw people do with context?
Most interesting thing related to which part of context?
Anything around how they manage context? What was surprising or interesting to you that you didn't know before you did the study?
Hmm. I think I was surprised by how much content, like I guess the main takeaway and the point of future studies is to figure out if this context capture does lead to more gains in downstream synthesis. That was one of my surprises, was when I saw that these people using the more specialized tools, they were capturing a lot more information. Um, but we know like information overload is also a problem as well. And so it made me kind of think, is this actually a good thing that they're capturing so much more context than these other people, their counterparts? And I guess sort of this was more of a descriptive exploratory study. So I was hoping to get answers and I couldn't really get answers because we were just laying out the land of like what this actually all looks like.
Mm,
Um, so I guess I can only say that was a surprise that I didn't discover like new things yet, just like this is what it looks like right now.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
Sort of
cool.
an abstract answer, but
Yeah.
it's just it just spurred a general like curiosity and like a want to know like what is going on here.
Yeah, yeah. Made you think of questions you didn't think of before.
Yeah.
I guess related to that, there's a question in the chat here from Wayne. Did your participants have a reasonable perception of the time and effort required for their own styles of preserving context? This upstream investment versus downstream frustration trade-off.
That's really interesting, and that's what the part two study is about. Because yeah, we have the video footage of the information reuse sessions where the participants who we watched them capturing all their information. We also got a chance to watch them go back and use this information. We haven't analyzed it yet, and so that's where I expect we would see comments on like, oh, I forgot to capture the page number. I'm never going to find it from the stack of papers that I have on my desk. Um, or perhaps like on the flip side, from the people who captured too much context, they're trying to navigate too much information maybe, and that can be overwhelming in its own right.
Mhm.
It's also the case that once somebody is comfortable with whatever their workflow is, they've sort of like needed out all of the problems that maybe they have around context, or they build workarounds, you know. So these are all things that we haven't explored yet, haven't studied yet.
Yeah, awesome.
Thank you for the question, Wayne.
All right. Um, Let me see here. Any other questions? Gonna start pulling up the next talk, which is pre-recorded.
Wait, should I stop the screen share?
Sure. Let's thank John for sharing his work with us. And I guess react with emoji, like a party hat.
Thank you everybody for coming.
So I think I'm going to switch it up a little bit. So I'm having technical difficulties with the pulling up the first talk. So next up was supposed to be Salma's talk on exploring practitioners' perspectives on barriers to inclusion. I think actually I'm able to pull it up now, so scratch that. So this again is a pre-recorded talk. Salma couldn't be here with us because of her internship, but she's excited to share the recording with us. And I'll be able to answer some questions, but I'll relay any other questions I can't answer to Salma. All right, so I'm gonna start sharing my screen if my computer will cooperate. And also, I'm going to share the sound.
Hello. Today I'll be presenting on.
Can everyone hear that? Excellent. All right. We'll take it away.
Hello. Today I'll be presenting on an ongoing investigation that is part of a larger study for my dissertation. In this study, I specifically focused on practitioners' perspectives on barriers to inclusion in participatory design, which is joint work done alongside Dr. Beth Bonsignore and Dr. Joel Qian at the iSchool. We examined the barriers participatory design practitioners face in attaining inclusivity and user participation in their participatory design practices by conducting an interview study with 6 participatory design practitioners across academia and industry in 2 countries. First, I want you to take 5 seconds to imagine what comes to your mind when you think of the term participatory design. Done? So maybe you thought of Sharpie markers and sticky notes because that's what's on this slide. Or you imagine a town hall meeting or colorful diagrams. Or you didn't imagine anything at all, which is perfectly fine too. But I'm quite curious if you imagine certain types of people participating in participatory design, or certain settings or contexts in which it's applied. Participatory design has been adopted more and more in industry and academic realms, as well as with a wider spectrum of people with different lived experience around the world. These are some of the reasons why we ought to explore and question participatory design further. Oftentimes, the ways in which we imagine or theorize something turns out to be completely different in practice. We consider the ways in which participatory design doesn't really pan out as well in practice by taking a look at various barriers. In our interviews, we found 7 primary barriers participatory design practitioners face in attaining inclusivity and user participation in their participatory design practices. We'll be delving more into each one, but very briefly, these relate to challenges in recruitment, time, shared language, trust and relationships, research ethics, messiness of the participatory design process, and transportation. So what exactly is the participatory design that we're talking about? Just to give a very brief overview, Participatory design is an approach in human-computer interaction and user experience, or UX research, that emphasizes design alongside people instead of strictly for people. It originated in Scandinavia in the 1960s and was heavily supported by labor unions to democratize workplaces. Participatory design bears similarity, or is sometimes synonymous in some circles, with other forms of participative research, including action research, participatory action research, cooperative inquiry, collaborative inquiry, community-based participatory design, co-design, and co-creation. While its democratic vision still remains, participatory design in its current form can sometimes fall short of achieving this democratic vision, especially when it involves marginalized people.
All right,
I seem
to be having some connection issues. I'm gonna let it buffer for 30 seconds and see if that helps. Apologies for the technical difficulty.
Joel, if it keeps having trouble, I could you could share the link with me and I could try and share it as well.
Yeah, let me do that as a backup. All right, let's see if this works. I'm gonna resume. Doesn't look like it buffered that much, sadly, but we'll see. Let's try.
Empowerment of people. Participatory design can be exclusive when only certain people are able and capable of devoting their time and resources to participating. While this is just one example of the ways in which participatory design may not be as inclusive as claimed, there are other challenges and barriers to inclusion that prevent participatory design from actualizing its goals of democratizing design. These barriers, as briefly summarized before, are what we will be focusing on in the remaining presentation. In order to solve problems, the problems must first be identified. This is the approach taken when interviewing participatory design practitioners about the barriers to inclusion they encounter in their practices. To get a better understanding of how participatory design practitioners navigate barriers in attaining inclusivity in their practices, we conducted an interview study with 6 participatory design practitioners across academia and industry. We were motivated to use an interview-based approach since practitioners have the greatest insight into questions relating to user participation based on their extensive experiences as organizers and facilitators. The semi-structured interviews were conducted using Zoom at a time convenient to participants and lasted approximately 1 hour, with the shortest interview lasting 39 minutes and the longest interview lasting 1 hour and 43 minutes. We recruited participants using snowball sampling and convenience sampling, and recruitment was all completed online through email. Our inclusion criteria required that participants be participatory design practitioners with substantial domain knowledge and have at least 5 years of experience applying participatory design and working with end users. The eligibility criteria required that participants be at least 18 years old and English speaking to ensure accurate comprehension and representation of their lived experience. Even though participants received no compensation for volunteering their valuable time and expertise in this study, their participation provided them the opportunity to engage in reflective practice and share their experiences for dissemination to a wider audience. We recruited 6 participatory design practitioners from regions including the US and the European Union, practitioners in both academia and industry, and those self-identifying as marginalized or whose intersectional identities shape how they design and work around these barriers. We also wanted to include perspectives from practitioners who have had experiences involving people who are traditionally excluded from participatory design, or have made it their goal to be more inclusive in their participatory design practices moving forward. 4 participants were men, while 2 were women. 5 participatory design practitioners were based in the US, while 1 participant was based in Denmark, which is one of the countries where participatory design emerged and is still commonly practiced. 5 practitioners currently conduct participatory design within academia, while 1 practitioner conducts participatory design in industry, but has had experience with participatory design in academia. Once the interviews were complete, they were fully transcribed and then open-coded using the qualitative data analysis platform in Vivo. To qualitatively analyze the 6 participatory design practitioners' reflections, we used a constructivist grounded theory approach, beginning where we iteratively coded and memoed preliminary analytic notes. There were in total 22 subcodes classified as different barriers to inclusion. As the interviews, however, produced large amounts of qualitative data, we selectively filtered the data based on its robustness, frequency it was mentioned by participants, and relevance to our overarching research questions. We then identified the most relevant and emerging themes grounded in the data. We found that practitioners' reflections largely related to 7 barriers to inclusion. I will be summarizing these 7 primary barriers in the following slides. Here are the 7 barriers identified in the interviews, as touched on before. These include recruitment, time, shared language, trust and relationships, research ethics, messiness of participatory design, and transportation. I will delve into each one more next. The first barrier to inclusion relates to recruitment, which all 6 practitioners mentioned. Participatory design practitioners especially encounter difficulties with recruiting people from marginalized backgrounds. These difficulties stem from locational factors, lack of convenience, the nature of participatory design attracting smaller group sizes, whether participatory design is conducted in industry or academia, and practitioners own focus working with only specific groups of people. One participant mentioned in their own words that, quote, with participatory design.
Apologies, it's breaking up again. I just managed to download the file separately.
Hello.
I'm going to try
on an ongoing
that
investigation
instead.
That is part of a larger study for my dissertation.
Can you hear the sound when I play this one?
Study, I specifically focused on practitioners' perspectives on barriers to.
So we were at, I'm going to back up a little bit to minute 7.5. Roughly here. Okay.
It's to recruitment, which all 6 practitioners mentioned. Participatory design practitioners especially encountered difficulties with recruiting people from marginalized backgrounds. These difficulties stemmed from locational factors, lack of convenience, the nature of participatory design attracting smaller group sizes, whether participatory design is conducted in industry or academia, and practitioners' own focus working with only specific groups of people. One participant mentioned in their own words that, quote, with participatory design, you tend to attract certain types of people, and maybe not some if you're just doing general recruitment, end quote. The second barrier to inclusion relates to time. 5 practitioners reflected on time as a barrier to inclusion, with many of the constraints arising due to scheduling conflicts and participatory design being a lengthy sequential process. A participant underlined in their words that participatory design requires commitment of time from people. It's not something that we just do one time, end quote. The third barrier to inclusion relates to shared language. Shared language ensures that people who are collaborating are on the same page, not in terms of actual spoken language, but in terms of shared terminology and understanding as well. 4 practitioners discussed the lack of shared language amongst participatory design practitioners, between practitioners and community members, and amongst community members. For example, one practitioner noted in their words that, quote, because this was a huge group, we are all individuals, we have our opinions, end quote. The fourth barrier to inclusion relates to trust and relationships. 4 practitioners talked about the importance of having trust already established with communities and the need to actively work towards sustaining built relationships. One practitioner highlighted in their own words how, quote, you need to build a relationship with your community and your community partner, end quote. The 5th barrier to inclusion relates to research ethics. 4 practitioners noted additional layers of complexity relating to consent, participatory design protocol, and publishing, especially when participatory design involves marginalized people. A lot of times, informed consent from people is a necessary precursor to their involvement in participatory design projects. One practitioner said in their own words that, quote, we always make it clear at the start of any of those sessions. They can stop at any point. They don't have to be there, end quote. The 6th barrier to inclusion relates to the messiness of participatory design, which 4 practitioners made note of in the interviews. While participatory design seems quite doable in theory, practitioners emphasize that it's oftentimes far more involved and messier in their practice. For example, one practitioner mentioned in their own words that, quote, being able to navigate design processes which are quite open and a messy process, that's not that easy, end quote. Lastly, the 7th barrier to inclusion relates to transportation. 2 practitioners mentioned transportation to the location of where participatory design is as challenges to inclusion. One practitioner noted in their own words that, quote, you're kind of gated by the individuals that live within driving distance or that are even willing to drive to your location, end quote. Identifying and elucidating barriers or blockers is a precursor to figuring out solutions to address them. As we have seen today, participatory design can become burdensome or even infeasible without support for certain people, especially those who are marginalized, which could lead to the preclusion of their participation entirely. For example, this can include children needing informed consent from their guardians, older users and users with disabilities who may need assistance from caregivers, low-income users who may need stable modes of transportation or paid time off to participate, and other users with a range of lived experience and needs. Challenges that relate to logistics were oftentimes brought up by participants, including recruitment, time, and transportation. Practitioners also mentioned barriers to inclusion spanning the timeline of PD from its nascent and earlier stages to throughout the design sessions and then after the matter. Practitioners would also touch on the interrelatedness of some barriers and how oftentimes addressing one can influence another. For example, time can have a large impact on the establishment of shared language and trust. Research ethics can also influence how recruitment or the PD sessions are conducted. Moving forward, we will ideate ways of improving pre-existing methods and approaches to conducting participatory design, or alternatively create novel interventions that bolster inclusive participatory design practices. One opportunity for the future of the study is to interview participants who are end users or community members in order to obtain an alternative perspective than that of participatory design practitioners, as well as non-users who are not familiar with participatory design and design research at all. To conclude this presentation, 6 participatory design practitioners shared their challenges relating to recruitment, time, shared language, trust, research ethics, messiness of the process, and transportation. By shedding light on various barriers to inclusion in participatory design, it is my hope that this presentation sparks new conversations surrounding its true inclusivity. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for your patience with technical difficulties. We have some time for questions, at least 5 minutes. So please go ahead and drop them in the chat if you have any. I think I see Beth Bonsignore also in the room, who's also a co-author on this work. So we can field some questions if needed.
Joe, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm curious, much in the same way that my study sort of outlined and described what the situation is currently. It seems that's what this study was, and so I'm curious about what the next steps are for this research.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what Salma would say. She's working right now on recruiting more participants to interview, and like you said at the end, we've been hearing a lot from the designer's standpoint in terms of what's challenging. So she really wants to get the perspective of the participants, and also especially people who weren't able to even make it into the lab. What stopped them from joining? So that's one. And another line that she's interested in down the line is diving deeper into understanding what solutions have been identified for overcoming these barriers. And if you think about the broader space of who is excluded from PD right now, you can imagine interesting solutions being developed for some populations, like people who have autism, how that might transfer to other populations that may not seem very similar on the surface. So mapping out that space is also exciting. I know she's also interested in virtual reality, and that's the next talk. We're going to see some of that distributed design techniques. So that's what I can think of. I don't know, Beth, if you have anything to add to that.
No, I think you did it. You covered it pretty well. It's interesting. I will say it's interesting, and some people I didn't hear the very beginning of our talk because I'm talk hopping, but I think it's interesting that there is this paradox that most of us don't realize in that the whole goal of participatory design is to figure out ways to include folks, but often we're faced with trade-offs and how many people we can recruit, where we can go to recruit them, and so we end up, as Salma's research is showing, not including as many voices as we could. So we're trying to figure out ways to address this paradox of that we're faced in practicality.
Yeah, that's good. Any other questions from the audience? You can pass that along to Salma as well. I actually have a question for Beth, if you don't mind. As a co-author,
Yeah.
I'm really curious actually, what we would say about how long have we known about these challenges? And what do you think is standing in the way of us overcoming them?
Wow. Loaded question. So it's really great. I think that some of the things that Salma has discovered, as she mentioned, we're building upon things that we've known about for a long time, which is like, how many people can you recruit them? How do you recruit them? What, how much time do we have to build this rapport? I think is one that we face with kids team, is that it takes a while for adults to learn to be designers. So how do you help support children in understanding design? So and that takes a long time, right? It takes a long time to build that trust and to build that rapport. So I think we've done that for quite a while. That's why we have models like the idea of of the roles that children or anyone can assume in the design process. Are you viewing them as a user, end user? Are you viewing them as a tester? Or are you viewing them as a full partner who can contribute or have this shared language in this dialogue? and so that's one way we've kind of addressed it, is we're like, well, for this particular design part of the design cycle, for this particular problem, where we only have enough time to work with children as evaluators, or to work with these audiences as evaluators. So that's one way that we've kind of addressed it, but it's always an unsatisfying kind of answer, right? So I think we've known that things like location, transportation, other barriers for quite a long time, and it's, it comes down to what can we actually practically do, and how best can we just balance those. But larger questions like how do you bring in audiences or participants who may not speak the design language, are things that I think we've only recently, at least in the Chi community, or the HSI community, we've just started to realize, oh, we're not really, we think we are bringing people, we're being participatory, but in fact, we have a different type of language, that there are problems that these whimsical sort of like blue sky design techniques don't quite answer the questions or address the concerns that some of the folks that we want to participate with most, underrepresented populations or communities of color, and different socioeconomic status. It's just totally different, sort of a very privileged way of looking at life. And so I think we're now realizing, oh, there are different types of techniques, and a lot of it we can draw from participatory action research. But anyway, I mean, I think those are the kinds of things that we're trying to do. But I'm looking forward to talking to Salma more about the trade-offs of opportunities, and you too.
I like this comment. Thanks, Beth. That's really good perspective. It's a good comment in the chat here about getting youth services and public libraries involved as well. Connecting to that, I think that's a good additional perspective of thinking about other institutions, not just designers, that are already inclusive in that sense, and thinking about those kinds of partnerships.
Sorry for continuing to interrupt you. I just want to thank Jennifer for that comment. I think a lot of the work at Mega Subramaniam in the iSchool is working toward that, is to looking at where we have these anchor institutions that we already have that are providing these sorts of services to take on some of these techniques, and to extend the participatory design in ways that already exist within our community infrastructure, right? And so I think that's a great opportunity, and Mega has done some work recently over the past year with the global pandemic. I can drop it in Discord, working with librarians in the Imagine These libraries. Oh, so great.
That's awesome. All right. Well, this is a good discussion. I'm going to move on to the next recording, and I have it loaded. So we shouldn't have any buffering issues. I'm gonna go ahead and start sharing my screen again. And I think my audio is still being shared, so we'll take it away.
Hello. Today, I will be presenting on using social VR for learning more about children's values, which is joint work done alongside Dr. Beth Bonsignore and Dr. Joel Qian at the iSchool, as well as with co-design partners who are part of the intergenerational participatory design group called Kids Team at the HCIL. To preface this presentation, I wanted to present a small anecdote from a formative study on children's values in technology. In an exploratory study that we conducted prior, one child design partner with the pseudonym Caleb shared his design concept drawn on a large sheet of paper of, in his words, quote, a VR headset that gives you happiness, freedom, imagination, a comfortable life, and national security, where you can go anywhere you want and do whatever you want and create any worlds that you want, end quote. In his Ready Player One inspired virtual world, he could play games, practice a security simulation, lounge on the couch supported by bungee cords, and search for keys.
1 second, I'm hearing a report that audio is choppy. I'm actually going to hand over the reins to Ria. You said you have it loaded. You're able to share your screen and
Yeah, I can
play the
do that.
video?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've poor connection again, so I'm gonna.
Yeah, I
stop
think
sharing.
your audio is also getting choppy.
Yeah.
I don't know. It
Sorry.
might get
Okay, so Ria, can you pull it up?
Yeah, I have it already. I hope everyone's can see my screen.
Yep.
Okay, great. And about the audio.
Hello. Today, I will be presenting on using social
Is it good?
VR for learning more about children's values, which is joint work done alongside Dr. Beth Bonsignore and Dr. Joel Qian at the iSchool, as well as with co-design partners who are part of the intergenerational participatory design group called Kids Team at the HCIL. To preface this presentation, I wanted to present a small anecdote from a formative study on children's values in technology. In an exploratory study that we conducted prior, one child design partner with the pseudonym Caleb shared his design concept drawn on a large sheet of paper of, in his words, quote, a VR headset that gives you happiness, freedom, imagination, a comfortable life, and national security, where you can go anywhere you want and do whatever you want and create any worlds that you want, end quote. In his Ready Player One inspired virtual world, he could play games, practice a security simulation, lounge on a couch supported by bungee cords, and search for keys hidden in eggs to gain control of the world. Caleb used his preferred values from a value framework called the Roquish Value Survey as inspiration for his innovative technology idea. Just from this idea and short anecdote, we start to get a sense of what things matter and interest Caleb, what values he is able to grasp and transfer into a tangible design, what kinds of technology he knows and would like to explore further, and also what sorts of media he consumes. Using Caleb's VR idea as a springboard, we became more interested in how other tools, like VR, could be used to learn more about children's values. So, why exactly should we study children's values? Well, it's important to understand children as individuals and users of technology in order to better serve their needs. A lot of times, usability, privacy, and security are the focus of value research in human-computer interaction and child-computer interaction. However, personal values, especially those of children, are oftentimes overlooked by adults in the design of children's technology. So, by not uplifting children's voices about the technologies that affect their present and future lives, this could potentially lead to technology not being appropriate or enjoyable to children in the short term and other negative consequences in the long term. It is therefore important to design technology that is more reflective of children's values, lived experience, and worldviews. However, how do we really study values exactly? Values are quite challenging to define and conceptualize due to their level of abstraction. So we must find creative ways to support their exploration and identification. So we went about this exploration using two main approaches. The first approach we took was using social VR, while the second approach was using the Roquish Value Survey. First, social VR offers people the opportunity to interact with others and to customize their own worlds and avatars. It allows multiple people to interact and manipulate objects within a virtual environment at the same time. Social VR is a flexible tool that can be accessed using a VR headset or without on desktop, and sometimes even on mobile devices. Using a social VR platform without the need for purchasing or finding a VR headset opens up lots of possibilities, like being more inclusive and accessible. Current commercially available social VR systems include Mozilla Hubs, VR Chat, AltSpace VR, Facebook Horizon, which is in beta and was formerly known as Facebook Spaces, and Rec Room, just to name a few. In our study, we decided to use the open source commercially available social VR tool, Mozilla Hubs, to learn more about children's values. Mozilla Hubs enable children to personalize virtual worlds reflective of their values, take agency and ownership over their designs, as well as interact with other children using the platform. The preset virtual scenes and large library of available 3D objects from the Google Poly Library were also an asset, allowing for relatively low barriers to entry and ease of use and customization. Second, alongside Mozilla Hubs, we use the renowned Roquish Value Survey, or RVS, framework from social psychology that is comprised of 36 individual values and guiding principles. 18 of these values are terminal values, or desired end states, while the other 18 are instrumental values, or preferred behavior. For example, taking care of family members or loved ones reflects instrumental values, while desiring world peace reflects terminal values. In our formative study, we demonstrated how RVS values help scaffold children's imagination according to the creative tech design concepts they inspired. In other words, their preferred RVS values served as inspiration for ideation. We wanted to continue investigating how RVS values could function as design scaffolds or supports, but in a different way, using social VR rather than the traditional paper prototype tools like big paper and markers that you saw with Caleb's example. Now that we've given a broad overview of our study, we want to share our methods relating to who participated in our study and how the study was conducted. We worked with 8 children ages 7 to 13 to learn more about their personal values using Mozilla Hubs, 5 of whom were boys and 3 of whom were girls. The 8 children were regular members of an intergenerational participatory design group and are all racial and ethnic minorities. They all attend public school in an inner-ring suburb in the Washington, D.C., Maryland metropolitan area, comprised of a large immigrant population. We elected to work with returning design partners as values are highly personal and trust and rapport ought to be established prior to surveying children for their values. In addition to 8 child design partners, we had 5 adult design partners helping facilitate the co-design sessions. All adult partners were women and experienced in design. All child and adult design partners are protected under the study's Institutional Review Board, or IRB, and could elect to stop participating at any time. We conducted 4 design sessions remotely on Zoom, as in-person research was prohibited during the COVID-19 pandemic. We conducted the study remotely and synchronously using Zoom in tandem with Mozilla Hubs. Zoom functions used included breakout rooms, share screen, and a digital whiteboard. The only requirements for children and adult design partners who were participating were that they have access to a working computer with internet connection, a webcam, and a microphone. Each of the 4 sessions followed a similar structure in terms of activities. First was snack time, and then question of the day, and then the co-design portion of the session using social VR, and lastly, big ideas, which were reflections where everyone gathered in the main room to share their reflections for the day. During the first 2 design sessions, also known as tech immersion, children were guided through and familiarized with Mozilla Hubs. During the 3rd design session, we focused on customizing avatars and continuing exploration of the platform. Our 4th and final design session focused on having children build their own virtual worlds that reflected their values. We will be sharing results from the 4th session specifically in the following slides as the data is most relevant to our research questions. Before children created their own virtual worlds, we first asked them to share which values they preferred out of 5 Roquish value survey values, which were drawn from the top values in our formative study. The 5 values they could choose from included equality, happiness, freedom, self-control, and world at peace. In this poll, the top value they selected was happiness. Children then went into breakout rooms with adult design facilitators to personalize their own worlds. Children used accounts they made or were given login credentials to use Mozilla Hubs if they did not have accounts, which were necessary to create scenes beyond the default one available. Each child got to design their own personalized virtual environment in Mozilla Hubs. The 5 values they used in the question of the day served as design prompts or scaffolds for the children to choose whether they wanted to incorporate them or not into their rooms. Everyone then returned to the main Zoom room to share their creations with the rest of the group, as well as to share which values they tried to incorporate into their virtual worlds. Here is one excerpt from children's concluding presentations of their virtual worlds, alongside a screenshot of the value-sensitive virtual environment they created. This quote in virtual world comes from Sophia, who said, quote, "This is my world. Most of the stuff already came in the world. In the back, there's a picture of a sunset. I like this scene because it is very calm and it's not too crowded and it's sunny and most of it is outdoors," end quote. As another example, this quote in virtual world comes from Bobby, who said, quote, "I actually choose this world because it's a peaceful place and it just looks like if you've seen the other half of the place, it actually looks really nice with a small river and few trees," end quote. Interestingly enough, while most children preferred the value of happiness in their initial survey, we found that most children gravitated towards and operationalized the value of world at peace when designing their virtual worlds. As presented in this table, in the beginning question of the day activity, 6 out of the 8 children selected happiness as their preferred value, with world at peace coming in second with 4 votes. After creating their virtual worlds, 7 children shared that their virtual worlds represented the value of a world at peace, whereas 3 children expressed that their worlds represented the value happiness. In addition, while some children said that they valued equality and self-control in the question of the day activity, no one expressed these values in their virtual worlds. Next, we'll discuss some of the implications of these findings. The first point we'll discuss is the incorporation of natural imagery. We also saw that children gravitated towards natural scenes for their virtual worlds more, and sometimes incorporated imagery of animals and food into their scenes. Whether this is a result of the tools used, Mozilla Hubs, and the Roquish Value Survey remains an open question. Perhaps one reason for this is because of the plethora of preset natural scenes available to children in the social VR system, which children may have associated with certain values more than others. Another reason could have been that children were not allowed to go outside as a result of the pandemic, which perhaps maybe led them to preferring the natural scenes over others available. The second point we'll discuss is the importance of tool selection. The discrepancies between the results obtained using a survey method versus using social VR to elicit children's preferred values are important to keep in mind. We found variation across these 2 materials, signaling how the materials and activities can drive children to indicate different value preferences and perhaps alter or even impede findings. This indicates that there is a great importance in materiality and tool selection in the design process. However, we can say for certain, though, that the 2 helped us discover more about children's values in quite a unique and novel way. To conclude, we examined how children co-design value-sensitive virtual environments using the social VR tool Mozilla Hubs, as well as their now Roquish Value Survey from social psychology. We saw how 8 children selected and then operationalized their preferred RVS values using Mozilla Hubs during a series of 4 co-design sessions. We applied the RVS value framework from social psychology in order to elicit and provide unique insight into the personal values of children. We found that children's value-sensitive virtual environments reflected the Roquish Value Survey value world at peace most, and that the tool selected for value elicitation may impact the results obtained. We hope that this presentation inspired you to think differently about values and how social VR can be used as a research and design tool, as well as how children's values ought to be identified prior to designing for children. We believe that by obtaining a better understanding of how children conceptualize their values using social VR technology, that design for children can be improved. Thank you.
All right. Thank you to Salma for sharing this with us. We already have a question in the chat, actually, in Discord from Linnea. Is that how I pronounce it? And I'm going to read it out and see if Beth wants to start with that, since this was mostly done with you. If you're still here, are you still here? Is Beth Bonsignore?
Yeah, yes, I'm still here.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to drop it in the Zoom chat here as well.
My question was actually about the last presentation.
Oh, it's about the last presentation. Okay.
Just ignore.
Okay. It looks like it could apply. Oh no, that's a good one. Yeah. How to evaluate level of inclusion. Okay. Any questions about this presentation about social VR and values? Go ahead and drop them in the chat. Got a few minutes.
Can I make a quick comment? And I think I have a sort of an answer for Linnea from the Discord question.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make a quick comment about Salma's work and how it was really interesting, because when we started this study, we were meeting in person. And so there were lots of conversations. It was interesting to me to see how aware about questions of, I mean, you always hear kids say things like, well, that's not fair, you know, and but when we're working with them and how they're very attuned to this idea of fairness and like actions and things, but they were, even the 8-year-olds seemed to be very aware of, you know, making sure that there were people received equal treatment, people had opportunities to study in places they wanted to, or do the things that they wanted to. So equality was really prominent. And then when we shifted the last series that Salma, where they designed their you know, the places, these places in Mozilla hubs, we had shifted to online kids team, and it was this crazy transition where we wanted to keep something constant for them, right? An experience that was constant for them, because they were now all online. And in fact, we still hadn't figured out how they were going to do school. And so it was like within 2.5 weeks that we had one of the first sessions with them online of talking to parents and realizing that we couldn't, you know, we were all going to be sheltering in place. And it was amazing how all of them, I don't know if it would be different, I guess, is my point. And we really did. Salma mentioned in her recording, are there any differences? How much can we attribute to the fact that we were in a pandemic, as to why they chose these pastoral scenes versus other scenes? But it was really kind of interesting that they were like, we want the world to be at peace. Some of our discussions were that there's too much chaos. So it was really from the mouths of babes, kind of stereotypical responses, but quite poignant in a way when they were saying, we want it to be peaceful. We want things to not seem hectic. And it would have been really interesting if we could have figured out a way to extend it to more, to get more kids, to reduce the barriers of inclusion and get more children to participate. Also, it was interesting that they wanted things that were more peaceful because of the problems that we had connecting, right? Because some of the children didn't have very great Wi-Fi connections, just like we saw earlier with our own presentation. So it was frustrating to them that they couldn't always design what they wanted to design. And we just could only imagine how it might be, you know, for all children. But to go back, if there's no other questions, I just wanted to try to answer Linnea's question. I don't know, that's a great question about the tools or methodologies to sort of evaluate the potential of different groups levels of inclusion. I don't know. There might be, but I will say that, you know, are there studies that compare design processes and results between two simultaneous groups? One thing that we have done is looked at children's level of expertise or for particular domains. So we had one of the projects that we've done, and this is work that was started by Tammy Clegg, who helped managed this year's symposium and is an associate professor at the iSchool. She has a series of science, everyday science learning activities called kitchen chemistry, where children learn practices of scientists with everyday activities like cooking, like they learn how to change variables, and in this case, the variables are ingredients, to experiment with making the perfect dish. So we do some semi-structured activities where they see how different ingredients, which have different chemical properties, like eggs, and what do eggs do in brownies? What is the difference between a dry acid and a baking powder, and how do they interact in making cookies, have different mouthfeels and things like that. And so they engage in these semi-structured activities where they learn powers of observation of scientists and measurement, and then they move on to sort of perfecting their different kinds of dishes. And so we did these same types of activities with kids team. And so these kids have been working and seeing themselves as designers for at least a year, several of them more than a year. So we built that sort of design sense. And then we worked with kids in an after school program who had never really done design, but were really interested in the science of cooking. And what was interesting is we asked them to design some future technologies. I can't remember exactly what our design question was, future technologies for helping, do these kinds of kitchen chemistry activities. And when we did a comparison, just a frequency analysis of the different types of ideas that they had, it was interesting that the domain expertise of the kids who had experience not in design, but in the cooking, were much different, so how we included them. So we had these two different groups. We were able to see that their design ideas were in volume were much fewer. There were much fewer design ideas that they had compared to the just blue sky design ideas that kids team had. So we saw that there was this sort of design sense and this ability to say, let's think more and more and more, let's push the envelope, let's think about more metaphors. But the kids team kids really didn't think about kitchen stuff and kitchen constraints or anything like that. And it was really interesting to us to compare. So I think that started to give us insight into the different audiences that you can include in design. Will give you, it seems like a no-brainer, but it will give you different insights. And so the different domain expertise and how you involve kids will give you different design results. So that's the best example I could think of right now that would show two different types of participants. How we could expand that, I'm not really sure, but hopefully that sort of answers your question.
Thanks, Beth. We are at 4:04, and we have a good message in the Discord as well about a reminder to join happy hour. So I'm gonna paste the link in here as well. Thank you everybody for joining us. Hope to see you at the Kumo space happy hour or on Discord as well. Thank you everybody. We'll close the room now. Thanks. Bye.